Are we live? Are we live? Are
Are,
we
are
online?
we live? I hope so. I've got less gear today, so I can't check. So I hope so.
We're coming live as always. I gotta turn this off. To LinkedIn Live to Wake Up and Deliver episode 24. Uh, I am from my normal location. John is remote from his
Yeah,
location. Tell us where
very
you are,
remote
John,
in
before
my
we
in
start.
in my car.
In your car. This is how committed
My
we are.
car.
We'll do it from anywhere as long as we're here
Exactly.
Monday.
That's what I'm thinking. Like we do commit to it, and it's important. We love to get it. We love to do it. We love to get it done. So yeah.
If we're this committed to this, imagine how committed we are to our customers.
Oh,
That's not the
I
quote this
that
morning.
I like that, but that's very true. Actually, in all fairness, that's why I'm doing it from my car because I've got a couple of meetings and stuff right after, and I'm like, I'm not going to be late, or I don't want to push the limits.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to start off. Today is November 11th. So we're going to take, out of respect, obviously, for today, we're going to take a minute of silence, John and I. So we're going to hold out for a minute. We're going to go from the 2 minute mark to the 3 minute mark. So everybody, if you can take a second, go. For everybody joining us, we're just taking a moment of silence, obviously for November 11th, remembering all those that have fought for freedom and for all the things that we take for granted nowadays. Let's jump into it this morning. As always, John, I have some brain food coffee for the morning for the mind. We're going to see John's reaction. This is my favorite part of the morning. Um, I got a few of them, but I'm going to settle on this one. The truth is whispered while opinions are shouted.
Oh, that one's good. I love it too. You're like, I'm gonna wait for John's reaction. I go back, when we're editing and we're putting stuff up and whatever, I end up like going through the different ones and the descriptions and everything. And like I have the same reaction every time. So, every week you're getting disappointed because it's always the same.
It's always the same. All right, we're getting started off with Wake Up and Deliver, like we already said, episode 24. A lot of cool things are happening now that we're full speed into Q4, midway into Q4. We're seeing a lot of different things happen in logistics. And John and I were talking about all the different activities. We settled on a few. Where do you want to start off this morning, John?
Well, without it getting too political, why don't we talk about some of what's been going on and some of what's popping up in the news ever since the confirmation of the election results and the clear
Yeah,
shift in power happening in the US.
yeah. For those that obviously didn't catch it, obviously Trump got reelected, and there's a lot of change happening already with a lot of people anticipating a lot of change within, whether it's tariffs, whether it's trade barriers, whether it's increased trade or manufacturing. A lot of speculation out there. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Do you think his second term is going to be as volatile as the first one, or do you think it's going to be better for us in trade and in logistics and all those wonderful things in between?
Oh, um, I I think he's gonna have an extremely strong focus to try to get things done and to actually really impact change. I mean, Second term, can't do anymore. Age, he won't really be able to do anymore. He's in an ultra advantageous position when it comes to, obviously winning from like as the president, but then also with the Senate and looking like the House as well.
Yeah.
They're saying it's probably going to be one of the most powerful governments that they've had in a while in terms of the U.S. and the way that it's structured. So I really do think that it could be a legacy type thing and could be really pushing to make change. Just given
I,
the
I
the
think there's
time.
gonna be a lot more stability in the system because of that as well. There's not gonna be as much confrontation. They can put a lot more different, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. They're gonna be able to put a lot more things through the system and
Mhm.
hopefully pick up on better trade practices. Because anything that benefits the United States obviously benefits North America in terms of trade and manufacturing. So I think it's gonna be an interesting time period. But to that point, we were talking about, what was it, Steve Madden, now preparing to shift their manufacturing away from China in anticipation of tariffs into other locations to help get ahead of it. Uh, what are your comment on that? Because I didn't get the whole piece of it. I would love to hear the full extent of it.
Yeah, I just I thought it was interesting. Steve Madden, one of the first companies, like they're a shoe company, right? If anyone doesn't know, Steve Madden, designer, shoe stores, things like that. I think their sales are around 3 billion a year, something in that range. So they're a substantial retailer, in the U.S. and Canada and stuff like that, and probably other parts of the world as well. But that's their home base, and they came flat out and said that they're essentially executing some of their plans. And their CEO said that they had been anticipating and planning for this for a while, based on what the election results would be, and they just hit start on that plan, anticipating some real shifts in tariffs and things like that with a Trump administration. So it's a couple of things. One, they're quickly doing it. I think the article I saw said that it was somewhere around 45%. Let's call it even 50% of their manufacturing that they're looking to quickly shift.
Yeah.
Um, and it got me wondering, like, well, how many other companies were thinking the same way, and how many other ones had developed a type of, I don't want to say contingency plan, but an alternative sort of sourcing and manufacturing plan, just with the same type of anticipation that might have been in the system. And then that really brings up the question of, like, well, what's that? How is that going to shift pricing? How is it going to shift costs? How is it going to shift timelines? How is it going to shift service providers? Because with so much concentration of manufacturing in China, people have built infrastructures
Yeah.
around that manufacturing sort of hub. So what's going to start happening, and who is going to start to maybe pull away, or who's going to offer different types of sort of strategic demand? And then the other thing is too, are you going to see more companies that have benefited from keeping maybe more just in time and like sort of processing and smaller inventory levels closer to their manufacturing, that are now actually going to go back to warehousing more inventory, being a little bit ahead of time if they're bringing it in from different places, maybe on different schedules and timings and things like that? Because what most people don't understand is that when you see the big retailers, no matter who it is, they're not doing their own manufacturing. And in essence, they are still just engaged in a type of contract manufacturing, which means, they're buying capacity, they're working with partners. These partners have balanced out their manufacturing with different clients as well. It's not that easy to just kind of set up a whole new operation when you have really high volume, when you have maybe really wide and broad SKU bases. So it's going to be a lot of shifts potentially, especially if the Trump administration really hits that hard in terms of how quickly they come out of the gate implementing it.
I think it's gonna be curious for the supply chain how they diversify where the manufacturing becomes, because I don't think they're gonna start concentrating like they did into one area. Like I don't see Vietnam becoming the next spot, or India, or any of these places. I think it's gonna become very much more diverse. So you're gonna see shifts of manufacturing going to Latin America, Mexico. You're gonna see some Vietnam. You're gonna see some Philippines. You're gonna see other places. Even I wouldn't be even surprised if Africa becomes a different area as the shift happens, because again, a lot of the reasons why people went to China, was it 20, 30 years ago, was because of the low cost of labor. As the labor has now increased and they have automated a lot of that, people are still very hungry for the low cost of labor. and shifting that towards other areas that have very low labor costs. And then the biggest one is obviously still in Africa, and I think there's going to be an economic shift towards that, and how that affects trade. Because a lot of the ocean liners and everything that we have, everything's set up on schedules to go to China, then go to the port of LA, or et cetera, et cetera. As we shift all these nuances, I'm curious to see how much of that dynamic changes, because you got to build the infrastructure. And a lot of the ports that are being built in Africa, funny enough, are being built by China. So there's a lot of this supply chain economy kind of changing. I think in a way, China expected this as well. And they have bought up a lot of the outsourced manufacturing in other places as they start building up their own automated way of manufacturing to help develop their own internal supply chain, and then on obviously the BRIC countries, and help support them. That's kind of where my thought went with the change.
Well, I wish I had the light bulb reaction that I could give you. That was very good. I like that one a lot. Yeah, no, I think I do think you're right. I don't think that you're going to see as much of a desire from anyone to just reestablish another, mega epicenter of activity.
Yep.
And then I think, as an extension to what you're saying there, is this going to be maybe a big push that starts a new round of innovation when it comes to manufacturing, right? Because if you are going to try to have more sites, if you're going to try to maybe have more locations or a broader base of capacity, you're probably not going to want to build mega facilities, right? You're going to want to see, like, how can I get the most out of the least amount of square feet, so to speak.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is, and this was something that was always kind of like bumping up against, sort of like hopes and like sort of like desires versus reality. I'll put it that way. When I was in the manufacturing industry, in the food industry, and the company I was working for was very vertically integrated.
Yep.
You get really stuck sometimes between, like, hey, there's so much new technology. I'd love to have all of these new things, but my plants are pretty old. The cost of retrofitting them in a lot of cases doesn't make sense for what you're going to do. And it's easier to sometimes just build new, because you can build right from the start with very intentional design and new technologies and new flows. So I'm very curious to see, what, if all of these pressures do come through, what you start seeing in the manufacturing space. That obviously is the very first step in supply chain.
I think the interesting thing that's going to happen in the supply chain, the way we were organizing, I think we're going through a big shift in this reorganizing. I think we're moving away from the mass production of what was prior to, and everybody's moving into this niche specific, catered to style of things, where you have more individualized stuff versus mass produced. So I don't see, and it's evident, you don't see everybody wearing Gap as they were in the 90s. Everybody has their own specific little brand that they kind of go to. And I see this through my own kids, where they'll like their local somebody as their design of their clothes. And they'll wear that over the Gap, the Old Navy, or the H&M. And they start manufacturing these things to be more specific. And I think those supply chains, the shorter ones with the smaller factories, or the nimble ones, will be the interesting ones to see, where you might get the t-shirts all from one location, but the printing and everything else is going to happen more localized in your area and with smaller batches. You're not going to see these mega batches. Yeah, no,
I agree, right? I mean, I think that, the newsletter I put out on Sunday was essentially getting into that issue, where it was really talking about, it touches on the same issue of what you're saying, in that, big brands and having that dominance because of the fact that, like, they happen to be strong in a country, strong in a state or province or in a region, like, that's going to fall away so hard. Because the other thing is too, in the analogy that I put there, because I don't, if you want the newsletter, you can go sign up and you can read it. But, like, the thing is that, like, you're going to get such a weird dynamic of manufacturing and needs as you get into this broadened out social commerce kind of market. Because, just like on YouTube, right? And I made this reference. There's lots of people doing similar content on YouTube, but everybody's trying to find their own angle, and everyone's putting their own spin and trying to create their own product. And when that moves into physical goods, that you have so much influencer driven activity in the market, let's call it, and I say influencer, and I hope everyone doesn't understand. I'm not talking just about like a popularity contest all the time, but like these communities where there's influence by a smaller group of people to a larger one. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And they're all going to want to create their own stuff because they're going to want to be unique, because
Yep.
being unique is going to identify people with you. So to your point, I agree with you. I think that those big, big long runs, big broad product bases, genericness of everything is really going to quickly fall away.
So what you're saying in a nutshell is, I am right. I'm going to put this on record. Appreciate it. We can move on to the next topic.
2 times. Yeah. You got a lot of light bulbs. I'm just going to start stacking them up. Like, you know what I mean?
The other piece that we wanted to talk about is a lot of chatter about the Great Freight Recession officially being over. We're going to kind of add this kind of news article. FreightWaves has been humming about this, saying that there's a big. We're seeing it. We're finally over the dip. We're moving on to better pastures. Everybody be excited about it. I'm not convinced. I really like Jason Miller's point on this. He's saying, hey, we're just seeing a small bit of a rebound. There is some containerization increase, but this is not an overall, hey, it's over. Do expect still another little dip. We're still not going to see anything really until Q2. And then expect some inflationary numbers of 2026, because 2025 might be okay, but we're might have a lot of challenges in come 2026. So it's not like that we're in the clear. It might be just a year of stability, and then we might dip again, is what he's saying. I don't know if I agree with him, but I can see it for sure. There's still a lot of uncertainty. I know the U.S. has an election, but there's a lot of elections happening in the next little bit. There's a lot of uncertainty still in the marketplace. I think we're not going to see a rebound come Q4, at the end of this Q4. I think we're going to see and we were talking about this, so I'm going to segue into it. We see a lot of people anticipated a rebound, and we feel that, I feel that, and you said the same thing, is they overbought, and it's not going to sell, and they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I definitely think, there's a weird thing going on. I mean, seeing those results, people are panicking with like potentially shifts in policy. They're pushing more stuff through the system maybe faster than they would have, right? Or they're activating their Steve Madden plans, let's call it that way. But right before that, there was, sort of article after article after article talking about the fact that a lot of retailers are changing their, I don't know, let's say, I don't like to use the word guidance, because they use it a lot when they're talking about their financial performance overall, but they've been changing their position just because of the fact that it seems like there's already too much inventory in the system, that they're not seeing the buying patterns from the consumers that they had hoped for, right? That they were really leaning on, and that there's a consensus that there's already too much happening in the market. Like there's already too much there. So I would agree with you. I don't think that this is a big call out, and I shared with you before, so I'll put it out there. From my experience, on that shipper side, right, where you were buying freight, where you had that spend and whatever.
Yeah,
it's once that cost goes down, and that activity gets baked into those P&Ls, and then ideally gets rolled into the budgets from these retailers.
Yeah,
it is not easy to get that up. Like, you are going to get every retailer, every customer that ships freight, period, is going to be doing whatever they can to keep the rates down, because it's been rolled into their numbers, it's rolled into their budgets, it's played into a bonus. Because I know people don't like hearing about all these things, and I'm not saying that that's a good reason for that to happen, but this concept of how we manage our businesses with these year-over-year results, and we use those to define success rates for the future and how people sort of are remunerated, like that's just real life. Like that's just happening. And I can tell you, they're not quick to give that up.
I think what would need to change to see kind of more of that not the volatility, because a lot of the RFQs are in. A lot of people have set their rates for the year, but as this pressure starts happening, and you see carriers have an opportunity to reject freight, I don't think. I'm wondering how much longer 3-year, 2-year, or even 1-year contracts with shippers are going to be sustainable. I think 6 months and under is where it kind of, you work the 2 seasons, see the volatility, and kind of work within that means is where you really need to kind of be focused on. Because I have a feeling that if the rates do spike even slightly for a little bit, you're going to see a lot of rejection, and they're going to have a lot of animosity from a lot of shippers, because they're going to feel this pressure of all this inventory. What are they going to do with it? They're going to want to figure out what to do with the excess inventory, or they need to shift because they betted on the wrong product. But on that note, before I continue, Bill made a comment.
I
Shipper
see. Yeah.
bring freight forwarders to avoid tariffs will provide some increase in Q4. This is not sustainable. Q1 March is still the projection for over-the-road volumes to stabilize and rates to increase on over-the-road. Ocean rail volumes are up as well as rates. Good point,
Well, the
Bill.
ocean stuff, the ocean stuff, like, yeah, obviously the second that they see the increase in activity, it's there. But I mean, it sounds like Bill's obviously like on that other side as well, as not believing that, something might be already over. And honestly, and even to your other comment about shippers, like, oh, like we'll only be able to sign 6 months at a time. Trust me, like the reality is that the shippers are the customers. Like they're the ones that have, that are essentially paying the bill, and they're going to dictate. I could tell you straight up that like there's never in my career where anyone was satisfied unless we or they wanted it, like the shipper, with a 6-month term. Nobody will accept that. Like they'll just keep pushing for longer. They'll want more stability. They'll want more certainty in terms of what that cost impact is going to be for them. I just don't see that changing. And I think a lot of this stuff, and I know, look, FreightWaves does a lot of stuff with their platform and what they're trying to do to get information out there, because it's a service that people subscribe to a lot of time too.
Yeah.
But I think once you start selling on low cost, or once that cost drops, it is the hardest thing to get back up. It is the absolute hardest thing, which is why grocery, as a great example, grocery went wild with their price increases and ramping things up, because that was an industry that could not pass a price increase through to save their life almost, right? That's why shrinkflation started, was because it was a way that you could sneak it in there. And not only by the manufacturers, that was supported by the retailers as well, because they didn't want to get customers agitated, because food is obviously sensitive. But the reason they aggressively upped their prices is because you couldn't increase the price of food. It was like always a no, like the Walmarts and the Costco. I shouldn't be naming names. Anyways, the point being, everyone would say no. Like, you know what I mean? They wouldn't listen to you. So I don't believe
that, to your point, that it's a hard area to break into, because even Amazon was the recent release that they're struggling in their grocery side. They can't penetrate into it because it's so cost driven, and it's not an easy market to get delivered right away. People still like to touch the fruits and the vegetables and the products, and it makes it a big challenge. And that's why Walmart still reigns king on that aspect of it. But they're very great at keeping those prices as low as possible, and continue that trend. I don't see any other big retailer coming in, and that's one thing that we need up here in Canada, is another retailer to help reduce that rate. But we're not seeing it.
So here's something interesting. I was going to post about it, but I was like, I couldn't really find a way to like make it work. But since it kind of fits here, it was funny. There was a study that was done on like Whole Foods, because of the way that they pitch like the better quality of the fruits and vegetables, and how it's more nutritious.
Yeah.
And this study basically compared them to like the budget grocers. The quality of nutrient, like both sort of in terms of density and whatever, was so negligible. There was no math in the world that was going to make buying that organic apple, so to speak, versus the more generic cost or budget friendly one, when it came to a nutrition side. Anyway, if you want to talk maybe about impact on the planet, pests, these other types of things, there might be something to say there, but definitely not on terms of food quality and nutritive quality for a person.
Yeah, and there's a lot of products out there. A lot of the products just slap that organic brand, when it makes no big difference, and need to be able to get that consumer base interested and have that price increase that we just talked about. A lot of it doesn't even add any value to a lot of the consumers, and that's why a lot of people are switching over, or they're looking at. But now we're seeing that other aspect where people are going back to whatever is the cheapest price right now, just so I can make a grocery run and be able to live off of it, right? And I think that's what everybody's going to focus on at this moment, is what do I need to spend to be able to get the same amount of food that I was 2 years ago, because I'm not feeling it. I'm not seeing it. And that's why some of
Yeah,
these added
well,
services that add money into like making grocery deliveries are gonna be such a challenge because I don't think anybody's really gonna put up that money for those deliveries if they're
right.
very,
Like,
very sensitive on it.
and if you look at, like, for example, like one of the better frames I saw that sort of analyzing the US election was that someone, one of the analysts said it's now pretty clear that, the kitchen table issues are what's really resonating with people, right?
Oh,
So obviously, your cost of food, your cost of gas, like, your general sort of like cost of living. And, that's where there were big sways and, a lot of wins on the Republican side, and really not enough connectedness from the Democrats, like, on those particular issues. And that's why I'm saying I don't think that there's going to be a big shift in terms of, like, oh, all of a sudden costs in these other areas, like, rates are going to start coming up, because in logistics, especially in the challenge, right? We see this all the time, is that, and you said this a few weeks ago, is that so many businesses see their operations and their logistics in that way as an area that has to stay as lean as possible.
mhm.
That, it has to be, because it flows right through. It comes right off the bottom line. Like, if you
Yep.
save $1,000 there, it goes right back to the bottom line. So, and then, the inference being that, the lower their costs, the lower they can sell at, or whatever. But I just think that with this increased pressure on these kitchen table issues, so to speak, I don't see how you're going to see a mammoth increase in prices, or a big reset in prices, when it comes to what people are willing to pay, because they don't have a lot of other areas where they're going to cut from. Uh, they could maybe cut from certain other areas of their organizations, when it comes to big bonuses and stuff like that. But I don't think that, unfortunately, we're in that type of reality for the world either.
I think the biggest change too that we've seen in the last 5 years, 10 years is supply chains and transportation are now very common to people. When you used to talk to people, we're like, "Oh, what do you do?" I work in the supply chain. Like, "Oh, what is that?" Now it's very much more understood, and people
Mm.
actually go, "Oh, okay." So they're a lot more sensitive to supply chain challenges and bottlenecks and how that affects their pricing. And it isn't as easy to kind of be like, "Oh, it's a supply chain issue. That's why we don't have this product." Well, why is it a supply chain issue? Like, what is going on in the background? Why isn't there not enough products? Like, if Target leaving Canada happened today, I think it would be a far more in-depth observation of why and what happened there, because there was supply chain issues. And at the time when they left, everybody was like, "Yeah, yeah, okay, whatever that means. They're out. They're back in the U.S." But now it would be like, what are those supply chain issues? And I think that's becoming even to the, like you said, for gas, for food, all these port strikes. People are wondering, is this going to increase the cost of my food? Is my bread going to go up in cost because we can't get the grains out of the Midwest and the prairies to the ports to get to the manufacturers and other locations? How is that affecting what I'm eating? And how's that price going to be justifiable? Because those bottlenecks, increase costs because there's challenges in these supply chains across the world more so than before.
Oh, right. And then the funny thing is that, when you look at, let's call it, let's call it, part of our industrial sort of base, right? Like, when you're talking about food, when you're talking about, like, different types of things like gas and all of these things, they directly then put pressure, massive pressure, on the personal purchases, right? When you're thinking
Mhm.
about, your own, like, just personal consumer goods, because of the fact that if people are paying really high over here, then they're going to have less to spend elsewhere, which then just continues to put cost pressure into the market. And that's why, like, the Xians and the Temus and stuff like that are crushing, are just crushing, is because even people with more disposable income, right, than other, like, wherever you are on that scale, they're still wanting to buy cheaper stuff, because they're like, hey, I just went and did groceries. It was $125 more expensive than what it was, and it's going to be like that every week. So that
Yep.
$500-$600 that now I'm overspending, or spending more in these necessities, I've got to
Gonna
find
save
ways
somewhere
to
else.
balance it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I'm not buying that $30 t-shirt, like, whatever, right? Or they're going to buy that one really heavily branded piece of gear, right? And they'll pay the premium there. But then it's going to become, to your point, very personalized, very niche, very tied to the communities or whatever that they want. They're not just going to randomly spend it on, like, this is okay, I guess it'll suffice. Absolutely not. Their standards and expectations are now higher, because they have a more limited amount of money that they are going to spend on those things.
Exactly. Well, John, we're at that time. Funny enough, this went quick because you're on location, and
Very quick.
as always, what are your closing thoughts, final thoughts? What should we focus on for the week, as you always do? What should we do?
You know, my biggest thought was like, hey, you know, I know everyone is in Q4 and you're rolling through peak and stuff like that, but you know, if you still have any runway that you need to sort of like finish off on when it comes to what are you going to do in 2025, right? Like the holidays are going to be past us very, very quickly. One of the biggest mistakes that so many organizations make is they don't get enough of a jump on the new year, which puts
Yep.
so much more pressure on your Q4 by the time it rolls around, because you know all of those things that you want to implement that you've put in your budget are going to start in January usually don't start until March or maybe April. So if there's anything that you want to do, it's like, I get that you want to, you know, kind of just get through the holidays and you know that's your main focus, but just be careful that you're not overpaying, because you're going to find yourself in a worse position potentially in the following year.
That's some great actual advice. And on that note, thank you everybody for joining. We'll catch you next week, Monday at 9 o'clock. Bye.
Bye.